Today we are talking cannabis and hemp. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
If Namibia misses this bus, there's going to be more African countries legalizing the use of cannabis and hemp, and we're going to miss out on a lot of things because, let's just face it, we're probably going to import all these products at the end of the day in any case.
Yes, which we are already doing. That's the other thing. It's so one of the things that people always are really scared of when we talk about legalization of cannabis is that we are not ready for this. Like, what's going to happen? The streets are going to be filled with cannabis. We are already utilizing cannabis. We are getting truckloads and truckloads of cannabis coming from Angola, coming from South Africa that's being imported. The demand is here. We see this in the amount of cannabis that's being confiscated every time there's a cannabis bust. These are truckloads with tons of cannabis on them. It's not a few bankies. It's kilograms. So the demand is there. We're importing it. We already have a cannabis economy. It's underground. But imagine, the potential if we can legalize that and regulate it, so that people can actually grow the plant and we create the products in our country, for our people. And that's the issue, and that's the worry of that potential happening, that we then start to import. This is what happened in South Africa, for example, with hemp. Hemporium got a license in the 90s for creating hemp products, plastics, papers, textiles, bricks, oils, salves, ropes, you name it, shoes, everything that you can make everything from hemp. But they couldn't plant it, so they had to import the hemp from Europe. And so this is where now is the time, basically. Now is the time. And so it's important for communities, agricultural sectors, boereverenigings, farmers associations, indigenous knowledge practitioners, indigenous plant medicine practitioners, to all come together and to demand that the government, legalize, because it is for the benefit of our country. And in terms of, the fear around it, we are already using cannabis. It's already there. We can mitigate, for example, harms of substance abuse by making it okay for people to talk about the fact if they have a problem, with the substance. But right now, anything that's being pushed underground creates a market that's not healthy because there's no regulation.
A couple of weeks ago, there was a court case, and this guy has been in prison for a year up north, and he had enough for one Zol, one. But someone else said he had 13 times that amount. And when the judge actually found that, oh, no, wait, that was wrong, you only had enough for one, he's like, okay, your sentence is reduced to 2 months. I'm like, this guy spent a year of his life in prison. While we have murderers and rapists out there, that you need to go find those people rather than.
But this is the issue as well with prohibition of cannabis. It's a waste of resources. So within the cannabis community, I get like 2 phone calls a week, asking for help. People telling me their story. There's a huge violation from the police and human rights violation, in a really vile manner, like violence. Sometimes people get shot, people get insulted, people get physically abused by the police. And very often the amounts that people are being arrested for are minute. Sometimes it's a plant, sometimes it's like a little handful of cannabis, which in the privacy of their own home, smoking a cannabis joint after work. Imagine if you're doing that with a beer, you're having your beer after work or your coffee in the morning, because all of those substances, if we look at the evidence and the harms, are more harmful than cannabis. So now you have the police smashing down your door, 10 of them, insulting you, violating your privacy, physically abusing you. Then you get put into the holding cells. All the while, the taxpayer pays for this money. And then sometimes I've had elderly people, like in their 70s, growing cannabis for their epilepsy or for their, rheumatoid arthritis or for their cancer, and they get arrested. and their bail is at 20,000 rand. And then you have murderers and you have rapists whose bail is less than that, you know, and who actually get bail. Because very often as well, cannabis users are denied bail. And so you have people sitting behind bars funded by the taxpayer for a plant, you know, which there is no victim. You're in your home, you are using the substance of your choice to relax after work, or using the substance of your choice to heal yourself because you don't want to use pharmaceuticals and you're choosing to use something natural, and then you're being arrested, you know. So the I mean the madness of that, you know, and the waste of resources that is being funneled down the drain, you know, really needs to be addressed, like, because it's actually problematic, because we don't have police resources to keep our women safe, you know, to keep our children safe. But when there's a cannabis plant, you know, they come in like 4 or 5 police cars. So yeah, it's really, it's quite tragic, you know, and it traumatizes the communities. Very often, you know, these are parents of children who are being arrested. You know, we've had this before as well, where parents have treated their children who are severely ill with cannabis, and then, you know, the parents are being arrested, and then you have communities that are traumatized, because then these people end up in jail, they end up with a criminal record, you know, you aren't able to get a job, you know, you're ostracized from society, you know, with youngsters, you then can't go, you know, to college or university. So there's a whole, it's like a web of issues that comes with these cannabis arrests that people don't really understand. It's a complete denial of our human rights. You know, because we as humans, we have certain rights, and in our constitution we have, for example, as well. So that's the other thing, when we talk about cannabis, you know, we talk about medicinal cannabis and recreational, you know, responsible adult use cannabis. It's the same plant. It's essentially the same plant. The only difference between, you know, someone utilizing cannabis for spiritual purposes, you know, for their religious purposes, you know, in regards to the Rastafari communities, you know, in regards to some of the indigenous communities, you know, and the First Nations people who utilize it as a spiritual sacrament, and someone using it for medicine, and someone using it, you know, to relax after work. It's all the same plant. And essentially in our constitution it states that we have the right, you know, freedom of privacy, freedom of expression, you know, freedom to practice religion, you know, and these freedoms to choose which substance I would like to utilize when I have a head, you know, a head pain, or if I have epilepsy, that needs to be respected. And so it's human rights violation on every aspect when we look at the prohibition of cannabis.
At the end of the day, as you said before, it is being used. There is a market for it. It's being imported. The government can just as well get on board and get a couple of bucks from it.
And tax it, exactly. You know, that's the other thing. We've seen this, you know, looking at different countries, or for example, different states in the US that have legalized, who have then used that tax money to filter that back into the communities, you know, building more schools, upgrading roads, you know, building proper rehab facilities. Because the other thing is, we have no trauma informed help for addiction in this country. You know, we have one rehab that is state sponsored, which still costs more money than most people can afford, and there is no trauma information around it, you know, and essentially in Namibia there's so much trauma, you know, stemming from colonization, stemming from apartheid. There's so much violence, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And that, with that comes so much substance abuse. But that substance abuse is, you know, from like sleeping pills to grandpas to cough medicines to, you know, alcohol to cigarettes to cannabis, you name it. It's a whole plethora. And being able to utilize, for example, you know, the money that would be taxed on cannabis to then help individuals who are vulnerable, you know, help communities, support them, like really look at how do we support people in their addiction, you know, around like trauma, in a trauma-informed and holistic way. There's all this potential that our government can utilize money from what they make from cannabis.
Thank you so much for taking the time and telling our viewers out there exactly what you are up to.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate it.